The sky over Spring Creek had never looked so still. It was the kind of gray that presses down on you. The kind that doesn't cry, doesn't thunder, just hovers, heavy and watching. I remember thinking that it was a quiet day for death. No wind, no birds, no music. Only the scrape of shovels and the slow, bored murmur of a pastor who sounded like he was reading about a stranger. I stood beside the casket of the man I had loved for 42 years. My name is Margot Hayes. I was 66 years old that day, widow, mother of 2. Or at least that's what I believed when I put on my black dress and let my neighbor Doris fix my hair with shaking hands. But that day, that exact day, I found out I didn't really know my sons. I didn't really know what had happened to my husband. And I didn't really know how far greed could reach inside a family. Because in the middle of my husband's funeral, my dead husband texted me. The cemetery was almost empty. And that was the first thing that didn't make sense. Ernest had lived in Spring Creek his entire life. He fixed bikes for half the town. He repaired lawnmowers for men who forgot to pay him. He'd show up with tools at neighbors' houses without being asked. He taught teenagers how to change tires so their mamas wouldn't get stranded on the highway. A man like that should have had a line of people around the block, but there were only 5 of us. Me, my friend, Doris, my 2 sons, Charles and Henry, and Jasmine, the fancy door, who always smelled like a mall. That was it. No men from the shop, no old customers, no church ladies, no people from the market, not even the pastor from the church we used to go to when the boys were little. Just a man in a black suit the funeral home sent because it's included. It felt arranged. That Charles stood to my right, looking expensive in dark sunglasses, even though the sun never came out. He kept checking his watch like grief was scheduled. Henry stood to my left, hands in his pockets, eyes red, but not from crying, from bad sleep, from nerves. They hugged me. Yes, they said, "We love you, Mum." But their arms were cold, their eyes kept moving, their lips pressed but didn't tremble. I felt it in my bones. Something was wrong. The pastor said Ernest's name wrong the first time, Ernest Hayes, and none of my sons corrected him. Ernest would have laughed. I did not. When it came time to throw dirt on the casket, my hand wouldn't move. Doris had to guide my arm. The sound it made, that thunk on the wood, is something I still hear in my sleep. That was when my purse buzzed. At first, I thought it was Doris's phone. Then I realized it was mine. I almost didn't look. Who texts someone at a funeral? But it buzzed again. I pulled the phone out with fingers that still smelled like cold wood and carnations. A number I didn't recognize. Just 3 words. I'm alive. For a split second, I thought I had read it wrong. I blinked. My eyes filled with water. I wiped them. I looked again. I'm alive. That's not me in the casket. The world around me blurred. The flowers, the casket, the pastor, even Ernest's name on the little temporary plate. Everything bent like heat waves. My throat closed. I heard Doris whisper, "Margot, are you all right?" But my brain was full of one impossible thing. Ernest. My Ernest. I typed with hands that were shaking so hard the letters came out crooked. "Who are you?" The answer came back almost immediately, as if the person was watching me from somewhere close, as if the funeral wasn't just a funeral, but a stage. I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons. Our sons. My stomach turned to stone. I looked up slowly. My eyes went straight to Charles. He was talking to the pastor, smiling politely, his hand on the casket like a politician. He looked sad, correctly sad, like people look in commercials for medicine. Henry was behind him, whispering to Jasmine. Did they look guilty? No, that was the worst part. They looked normal. But when you've lived with a man for 42 years, you know his voice on paper, on the phone, in the dark, in a storm, and those messages, the rhythm, the way he called them our sons, not the boys. That was how Ernest talked. I felt the phone slipping from my hand. Doris tried to take it. I pulled it back. I couldn't let anyone see this. "Not yet, Mom," Charles said, suddenly beside me, eyes narrowed behind expensive glasses. "You okay?" I stared at him, and, for the first time in my life, I did not see my little boy. I saw a man I didn't know. "I'm fine," I lied. "I just need to go home." People think grief hits all at once, like a wave, like a slap. It doesn't, single quotes. It comes in layers. First, there's the shock. He's gone. Then there's the practical. Call the funeral home. Call the bank. Pick clothes. Then comes the silence. But that day, instead of silence, I had questions. If Ernest was really alive, where was he? If Ernest was not alive, who knew enough to text me at the exact second I dropped dirt on his coffin? And most of all, why would someone say, "Don't trust our sons"? I sat in my living room that night with all the lights on. I didn't cry. I didn't eat. I didn't even take off my shoes. I just sat with Ernest's old coffee mug on the table, the one with the chipped handle, and stared at my phone. No more messages came. So I started rewinding my life. I met Ernest when I was 24, in a town so small you could hear the noon siren from every kitchen. I was wearing a faded green dress that was too thin for spring. He had grease on his hands and sun on his face. He stepped out of that tiny bicycle shop, the one his father left him, and he smiled like he'd been waiting for me. "Good morning, Margot," he said, soft, shy. I didn't even own a bike, but I said, "Maybe you should check mine." That was Ernest, quiet, steady, kind, in that slow, unshowy way. Men are kind when they've grown up poor and know how far $5 can stretch. We courted under the big oak in Town Square Park, the one that now has termite damage and city notices. We married in a simple dress with no lace. We lived in a house with a tin roof that leaked when it rained, and we laughed every time we had to put pots out like a game. We didn't have money. We had enough enough love, enough patience, enough coffee on the porch, enough nights of "you rest, I'll do the dishes." Enough will make do. When our first son Charles was born, I thought happiness had a shape round, warm, with Ernest's eyes. When Henry came 2 years later, I thought, this is it. This is how it's supposed to be. Ernest took them fishing. I sewed their clothes. We were family, at least. I thought we were. The change didn't come suddenly. It came money-shaped. Charles grew up looking at the world like it owed him something better than a tin roof. He always asked, "Why don't we have a car? Why don't we move? Why don't we live like them?" Ernest once offered him the shop, the thing that kept food on our table for decades. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad," Charles said. "I'm going to be someone important." He didn't mean to stab his father with that sentence, but he did. I saw Ernest that night on the porch, staring at the stars, shoulders heavy. He didn't complain. He never bad-mouthed his son. He just sipped his coffee and said to me later, "Money's changing our boys, Margot. We ain't enough for 'em anymore." I didn't want to believe him. A mother never wants to believe that. I said things like, "They're just busy. They live in the city now. They'll come around." But Ernest was right. They didn't come around. The nicer their cars got, the shorter their visits became. They came smelling of cologne and city dust. They brought us gifts we didn't need. Blenders, rugs, kitchen gadgets like guilt wrapped in plastic. And then Charles married Jasmine Albright. If you've never seen someone disapprove of your whole existence without saying a word, meet a city woman in 5-inch heels on a dirt porch. She said, "Nice to meet you," with only her fingertips. She looked at our little house the way some people look at thrift stores, like, how sad, but also, how much. That night, I heard Charles whisper to her in the kitchen, "Next time, we'll take them out. This is different." Different. The home he grew up in was different. After that, the suggestions started. "Mom, Dad, you should sell this place. You should move to a community. You should retire. You shouldn't be alone. Let us manage the money. Think about your future." But none of it was about our future. It was about theirs. They were building lives that had no room for two old people with leaky roofs and slow mornings. Still, I never, not in my worst thoughts, believed they were dangerous. Ambitious, yes. Ungrateful, yes. Cold sometimes, yes. But capable of harm, no. Until the accident. It happened on a Tuesday morning, a normal one. I was in the kitchen making Ernest's favorite lunch, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, extra butter. He always said, "I worked hard, I'm gonna eat good." The phone rang with that sharp hospital tone every woman recognizes. "Mrs. Hayes, your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." My heart dropped so fast I had to grab the doorframe. "What happened? Is he alive?" "Was at the shop." "Ma'am, please come quickly." Doris drove me because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. When we got to the hospital, my sons were already there. Before me, before anyone called them, before anyone knew anything. That was the first red flag. I didn't see it then. "Grief makes you blind, Mom," Charles said, hugging me tight. It was bad. A machine exploded at the shop. Dad has burns and head trauma. A machine exploded. I pictured sparks, metal, hot fire, Ernest on the ground. I cried right there in the hall. They said only one person could see him at a time. When I walked into the ICU room and saw him covered in tubes and bandages, I thought, no, that's not my Ernest. My Ernest fixes things. My Ernest is strong. I held his hand, the only part of him that looked like him. Ernest, I'm here, I whispered. I'm not going anywhere. I swear to you. He squeezed my hand. The nurse said it was a reflex. A wife knows the difference. The next 3 days were a blur of plastic chairs, vending machine coffee, and my sons whispering with doctors in corners. But they weren't whispering about treatments. They were whispering about money. Workers' comp could cover $75,000. His life insurance is $50,000. We have to see who the beneficiary is. We need to start the claim. I heard those words fall out of my own sons' mouths while their father was fighting for his life. I snapped at them. I don't care about the money. I want your father. They backed off, but only on the surface. Their eyes were calculating. Their minds were 7 steps ahead. On the 3rd day, the doctor said what every wife dreads. There's very little hope. I said, we will keep him on the machines. I will take him home. I will care for him. Charles looked at Henry. Henry looked at Charles. Mom, Dad wouldn't want that, Charles said, gentle, rehearsed. He wouldn't want to be a burden. A burden, that word set something on fire inside me. He's your father, I said, voice shaking. Not a burden, but they had already decided. That night, at 4:37 a.m., Ernest died. I cried over a body still warm. I held his face and begged God to take me instead. The nurse said, he's gone. My sons came with papers, with funeral home numbers, with insurance claim forms. It was like they had everything ready. Too ready. At first, I thought the funeral being small was just the way things worked now. People busy, people heartless, people forgetting. But after that text, I saw everything again. My sons cutting the guest list. My sons insisting on a closed casket. My sons choosing the shortest service. My sons telling me, it's what Dad would have wanted. Simple. Ernest was simple, yes, but he was not secretive. So why was his death being treated like a thing to be rushed? Why had the shop which supposedly exploded been cleaned out before I could even go see it? Why did the hospital call me about an accident, but my sons arrived first? Why was the casket closed if it was just burns? Why did the doctor's words sound so final? Why did an unknown number tell me, don't trust our sons? That night, after the funeral, another message came. Check the bank account. See who's been moving money. I stared at it so long the numbers blurred. This wasn't a prank. Whoever it was knew things, not just he's alive, but there is money. There are movements. There is a plan. So the next morning, I put on my best cardigan, pulled my grief tight around me like a coat, and went to the bank. Mrs. Thompson, who had known Ernest and me for 30 years, hugged me. Oh, Margot, I'm so sorry about Ernest. Thank you, I said. I need to see our statements. She printed them out. I almost fainted. In the last 3 months, just before Ernest accidentally died, someone had withdrawn $1,000, then $3,000, then $4,000 from our savings. I had not withdrawn anything. Ernest never took that kind of money without telling me. Who made these withdrawals? I asked, voice thin. Your husband, she said. He came with one of your sons. I think Charles. He said he was helping him read the documents. Helping him read. Ernest didn't need anyone to help him read. That was when the world, the funeral, the rushed arrangements, the cold hugs snapped into one terrifying shape. This wasn't grief. This was a setup. This was about money. This was about money. This was inside my own family, and I hadn't even seen the worst of it yet. I went home and pulled out Ernest's old metal box, the one he kept under his desk with all our papers. The smell of old ink and wood hit me like a memory. The life insurance was there, just like Charles said, but it had been increased 6 months earlier, from $5,000 to $50,000. Ernest had never told me. Ernest told me everything. Then I found a second policy, a workers' compensation one, bought 2 months before his death. Who buys an accident policy right before an accident? At the bottom of the drawer was a note in Ernest's handwriting. Charles keeps insisting I need more insurance. Says it's for Margot. But something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. I sat on the floor and cried, not because Ernest was gone, but because he had seen it. He had been worried. He had tried to warn me. I just hadn't listened. My phone buzzed again. The insurance was their idea. They pushed him. It was a trap. My hands went cold. Whoever was texting me wasn't guessing. They knew. That was when I realized something that hurt even more than Ernest's death. My sons didn't just stop loving us. They had started calculating us. They had looked at their father, a man who fixed their toys, held them when they were sick, taught them to fish, and they had seen a number. $50,000 if dead, $75,000 if work, house sold, $100,000, savings, couple thousand, added up, divided. Greed is math without love. I wish I could tell you I ran to the police right then. I didn't. I was still a mother. Mothers hesitate. We think, maybe I misunderstood. Maybe there's an explanation. Maybe I'm just grieving. But the truth was already in motion. Someone who said he couldn't speak because they're watching, was pushing me toward it. I just didn't know yet who that someone was, or that my sons were about to try to declare me crazy and take everything Ernest and I had built. And I didn't know that my husband had hired a man to protect me before he died. But that part of the story, the part where the truth explodes in their faces, comes later. For now, remember this image: a 66-year-old widow in a quiet house, a dead man's note on the floor, insurance papers spread like a crime scene, a phone lighting up with secrets. And outside, two sons already planning what to do with her money. The next morning, the sunlight felt wrong, too bright, too gentle for what I had discovered. There was something cruel about how ordinary everything looked. The chirping birds, the smell of coffee drifting through the kitchen window, the neighbor's sprinkler ticking away like a metronome. The world kept moving, completely unaware that mine had cracked open. I poured myself coffee anyway, out of habit, not desire, and looked at the cup Ernest had once called his thinking mug. The one with the crack that curved like a smile. I ran my finger along the rim and whispered, "What did they do to you, Ernest?" My phone sat beside me, silent now. No new messages, just that empty, glowing screen. My only witness, the visit from Charles. By mid-morning, a black sedan pulled into the driveway, Charles's car. I recognized the hum of the engine. He always left it running too long, like a man who never really arrived anywhere. He came in without knocking. "Mom," he said, smiling too wide, "I brought you something. A bottle of red wine. Expensive. The kind you give to someone you're about to betray." He poured himself a glass before I could answer. "How are you holding up?" "I'm managing." He sat down across from me, swirling the wine like he was in a commercial. "I know this is hard," he said softly, "but we should start thinking ahead. About practical things." "Practical," I repeated. "The insurance money," he said, too casually. "It'll be about 15,000 after everything's processed. Henry and I can help manage it. You could move into a nice retirement place, somewhere safe, maybe sell the house while prices are still good." I stared at him. "How do you know the exact amount already?" He blinked just once and smiled. "Dad and I discussed it months ago. He wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable." A lie. I had Ernest's letter now. I knew better. "And what do you suggest I do with the money?" I asked, pretending innocence. His eyes lit up, just for a second, like a child who'd been caught almost confessing. "Invest it? Henry and I can handle it. We know people. We can double it in no time." "Double it," I repeated slowly. "That's generous." "Mom," he said, leaning forward, "let us take care of you. You shouldn't have to worry about bills or scammers." The irony nearly made me laugh. "Let me think about it," I said. He smiled, satisfied, and left soon after. But as I watched his car disappear down the road, a cold truth sank into my bones. They weren't just trying to take Ernest's money. They were coming for mine, to dot the next message that night. As the sun dipped behind the trees, my phone vibrated again. "Tomorrow, go to the police. Ask for the report on Ernest's accident. There are contradictions you need to know." I didn't hesitate. Whoever this was, whoever had been warning me, had been right about everything so far. The police station, the Spring Creek Police Department, hadn't changed in 40 years. Same coffee-stained wallpaper, same ceiling fan that wobbled like it was dying, same old smell, paper and dust and regret. Behind the front desk sat Sergeant O'Connell, a kind man with gray hair and a voice that always sounded like he'd just woken from a nap. "Margot Hayes," he said, standing up when he saw me. "I'm so sorry about Ernest. He was a good man." "Thank you, Sergeant," I said, "but I need something official. The report from his accident." He frowned. "Accident?" "Yes, the explosion at his shop." O'Connell blinked. "Explosion." He turned to his computer, typed something, squinted, and then shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes. We don't have any report of a work accident involving Ernest Hayes. The floor seemed to tilt under me. There must be a mistake, I said, clutching my purse. He was brought to Memorial Hospital. They said, yes, I have the hospital transfer record here. He clicked another file, but according to their report, he wasn't admitted for an explosion. He was admitted for methanol poisoning. I stared at him. Poisoning. He nodded gravely. The doctors found methanol in his system, enough to cause blindness, brain damage, even death. They notified his immediate family. The immediate family. My voice was a whisper. You mean my sons? He nodded again. They asked us not to share those details with you. Said you were too fragile, emotionally. They wanted to handle everything themselves. My body went cold. They hadn't just lied. They had rewritten the cause of death. Sergeant, I said slowly, if someone poisoned my husband, that's not an accident. That's murder. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. Are you saying you suspect foul play? I'm saying I have proof. The letter that night, I gathered everything. Ernest's handwritten note about not trusting Charles, the forged bank withdrawals, the insurance papers, and the messages from the unknown number. I spread them across the kitchen table, like puzzle pieces, everything connected, and all roads led to my sons. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, waiting for the next message. It came at dawn. Go to the shop. Look in his desk. There are things you didn't see. The shop when I reached Ernest's shop that morning, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It didn't smell like smoke, or like anything that had exploded. It smelled disinfected. To clean. The metal tools were polished. The floor swept spotless. Machines sat perfectly aligned, not one out of place. There were no burn marks, no scorch, no damage, nothing. It was as if the explosion had been scrubbed out of existence. I walked slowly to his old desk, the one covered in scratches from decades of repair work. I pulled open the drawer. Inside, under a stack of receipts, I found a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, firm, neat, unmistakably earnest. Charles insists I need more insurance. He says it's for you, but something doesn't feel right. I don't trust his intentions. My hands shook. Beneath it was another note. Henry brought me papers to sign. Says there, for modernizing the shop. I don't understand what they are. Why the hurry? Ernest had sensed it. He had known they were plotting something. Then I saw a sealed envelope with my name written across it. I tore it open. Inside was a letter. Ernest's final words. My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. I have noticed strange changes in Charles and Henry. They are too interested in our money, in the insurance, in the house. Jasmine pressures them, but they are making their own choices. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more concerned about my safety, that at my age, any accident could be fatal. Those words didn't sound like concern. They sounded like a threat. I love you, Margot. If anything happens, don't trust anyone blindly, not even our sons. Ernest, I pressed the letter to my chest and cried until I couldn't breathe. He had seen it coming. He had tried to warn me, and still, they had killed him. Henry's visit that afternoon. Henry came by unannounced, carrying a bouquet of lilies and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Mom, he said, kissing my cheek. You look tired. I'm fine, I said, watching him closely. He glanced around the house, scanning things like he was taking inventory. We've been thinking, it's probably time to sell the house. The market's good right now. I looked straight into his eyes. You knew your father didn't die in an explosion. He froze. What are you talking about? I went to the police. There's no report. They said it was poisoning. He went pale, then recovered too fast. Mom, you shouldn't be doing this to yourself. You're confused. You're grieving. Am I? I asked quietly. He stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over his chair. You need rest. I'll call you tomorrow. He left, but I saw him from the window, pacing on the porch, calling someone, his voice sharp and urgent. 10 minutes later, another message came. They'll come tomorrow. Together, they'll tell you you're imagining things. Don't believe them. And don't eat or drink anything they offer. The trap the next morning, I was ready. At exactly 10 o'clock, a car pulled up. Charles, Henry, and Jasmine. They came inside smiling, arms full of pastries and coffee from my favorite bakery. Mom, Charles said warmly, we're worried about you. The neighbors say you've been acting strange. Doris said nothing. I cut in. He blinked. We just thought you could use some company. We brought your favorite almond croissants and coffee, Henry added. That special blend you like. The smell hit me immediately. Sweet, strong, bitter to bitter. I smiled tightly. Thank you, but I already ate. Come on, Mom, Jasmine said, voice sugar. You've lost weight. You need to eat. I didn't move. Neither did they. Charles finally sighed. Mom, we need to talk. Henry and I have spoken with some doctors about your behavior. My behavior. Yes. The police visits. The strange questions. The paranoia. Dr. Albright thinks you might be developing something. Confusion. Delusions. It's normal at your age. My heart pounded. You mean Jasmine's father? He nodded. He's a professional, Mom. He can help. Help. They were trying to declare me incompetent to take control of the house, the insurance, everything. I stood. I'm fine. And I'm not crazy. Charles exchanged a glance with Henry. Mom, please, don't make this harder. We can file for guardianship if you won't agree voluntarily. It's for your own good. I looked at them both, my sons, the babies I had once held, and realized I was staring into the faces of strangers. What if I refuse? I asked quietly. Then, Charles said, his smile gone, we'll do it the legal way. They left soon after, taking their untouched pastries and poisoned coffee with them. I locked the door. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from fury. They had already killed my husband. Now they were trying to erase me too. My phone buzzed again. Margot. This is Stephen Callahan. I'm a private investigator. Ernest hired me 3 weeks before he died. He suspected your sons. He was right. I have the evidence. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the corner cafe. Back table. Come alone. I put the phone down and whispered, Ernest, you clever man, you knew. Tomorrow, everything would change. The following day dawned gray again, not storm gray this time, but a softer, restless kind of gray. The air felt thick, like the world itself was holding its breath. I woke before dawn, unable to stop my mind from circling the same thoughts. What if it's a trap? What if this Stephen Callahan doesn't exist? What if Charles and Henry find out? But another voice, quieter and older, whispered back from somewhere inside me. Ernest trusted him, and that was enough. I decided to go. The meeting I was walking down Maple Avenue toward the corner cafe. It was the same cafe where Ernest and I used to share cherry pie on Friday afternoons. Now, every step toward it felt like walking into a story I didn't know the ending to. The cafe was modest, chipped paint on the door, the faint smell of burnt toast, and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. I spotted the table he'd mentioned, the farthest one in the back, half hidden behind a plant. I ordered a chamomile tea to steady my hands. At exactly 3 o'clock, the doorbell jingled. A man stepped in, tall, maybe mid, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much. He wore a tan jacket and carried a weathered brown folder under his arm. When he saw me, he approached quietly, as if not to startle a wounded bird. Mrs. Hayes, he asked. Yes, he nodded. I'm Stephen Callahan. I worked for your husband. The way he said worked, gentle, respectful, told me immediately that Ernest had been right to trust him. He sat down across from me and placed the folder on the table. Before I show you what I have, he said softly, you should know, this isn't going to be easy. What you'll hear, it's going to hurt. I've already been through hell, I said, voice firm. You can't hurt what's already broken. He gave a small nod, as though he'd expected that answer. Then he pulled a small black recorder from the folder. This, he said, is why your husband hired me. He pressed play. Ernest's voice, the sound that came through that little speaker shattered me. It was Ernest, his voice soft, deliberate, carrying that gentle rasp from years of shop work. For a moment, it was like he was right there in front of me, telling one of his old stories about stubborn engines and lazy customers. Stephen, he said, his voice calm but wary, I need you to know that if something happens to me, it won't be an accident. My sons, they're not the boys Margot and I raised. They've been pressuring me to increase my life insurance. Charles says it's to protect Margot, but I checked the paperwork. There are clauses that benefit them directly. My breath caught. Ernest paused on the tape, like he was swallowing his fear. Henry's been acting strange too, asking what time I leave the house, what I eat for breakfast, whether Margot comes to the shop. He says it's concern, but I don't buy it. There's something darker at work here. Stephen pressed pause. This was recorded 3 weeks before his death. He said quietly, Ernest came to my office after your sons started talking about insurance. He told me he didn't trust them anymore. I advised him to let me install audio devices in your home phone line, just in case you bugged our house. I asked, stunned. Only after Ernest insisted. He wanted to be sure that if anything happened, there would be proof. He pressed play again. Stephen, if anything happens, promise me you'll protect Margot. She's the only thing that matters to me. Don't let the boys manipulate her. I covered my mouth. My husband had been preparing for his own murder, not because he was paranoid, but because he knew his sons. The confession. Stephen opened the folder and took out another recording device, this one smaller, labeled with a strip of masking tape, March 12th. This, he said, was recorded the day before Ernest's death. He pressed play. The voices that came through made my blood run cold. Charles. Double quotes. No, we can't wait any longer, he was saying. The old man's starting to get suspicious. Yesterday, he asked why I was so interested in the insurance. We have to move now. A second voice, Henry's lower, nervous. You sure this will work? Of course it'll work. I already have the methanol. The doctor said even a small dose can look like a heart attack or a stroke. It's perfect. By the time anyone figures it out, he'll be gone. There was a pause, then Charles again. Mom won't be a problem. She's too emotional. Once Dad's gone, she let us handle everything. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt the tears dripping down my hands. That's their voices, I whispered. Stephen nodded grimly. Yes, the police will authenticate them when we turn this in. He handed me a photograph, grainy, black and white. It showed Charles outside a hardware store, holding a small bottle in a paper bag. The date printed on the bottom corner was March 9th, 4 days before Ernest's death. He bought it under a fake name. Stephen explained, paid cash, but the surveillance camera caught his face. I stared at the photo until the image burned into my mind. My own son, buying poison. The motive. There's more, Stephen said quietly. He spread several sheets of paper across the table. I pulled their bank records. Charles is in deep debt, $70,000 to a private lender in the city. Henry has gambling debts over $40,000. They were drowning. Mrs. Hayes, the life insurance was their lifeline. I felt sick. The sons we had raised to be kind and honest had turned desperate and deadly. Why didn't you go to the police after Ernest died? I asked, trembling. I tried, Stephen said, but your sons moved fast. They bribed the attending doctor to falsify the death certificate. Changed the cause of death to heart failure from a workplace accident, without medical proof of poisoning. The authorities couldn't open a case. I needed solid evidence first. He leaned closer, his voice low and urgent. And now, we have it. Then he hesitated. There's one more thing you need to hear. He pressed play on a final recording. This one was newer. Both voices again, Charles and Henry, but colder, quieter, like snakes whispering. Charles, once we have Dad's insurance, we get rid of Mom too. We can't risk her figuring things out. Henry, how? Charles, same way, but we'll make it look like suicide. Lonely widow, grief, pills. Everyone will believe it. The money will all come to us. The recording clicked off. The world seemed to disappear around me. The cafe, the sound of clinking cups, even my heartbeat all gone. They had planned to kill me too. For money, for greed, for nothing. The plan for justice. Mrs. Hayes, Stephen said softly, I know this is unbearable, but we can stop them. We have enough to get a warrant for their arrest, for the doctor's collusion, even for the insurance fraud. But we have to act fast. They're planning to have you declared mentally incompetent tomorrow at 10. I intercepted their phone call to Judge Miller. If they succeed, they'll control your estate, and you won't be able to testify. I stared at him, the horror turning into something harder, sharper, resolve. Then we act tonight, I said. He smiled faintly. Ernest was right about you. You're stronger than they know. He gathered the evidence back into the folder, the photos, the recordings, the documents, and stood. We'll go straight to Sergeant O'Connell, he said. He's clean. He'll listen. I followed him out of the cafe. The late afternoon wind smelled like rain, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a woman preparing for war. The police station, again by 8 that night. We were sitting in Sergeant O'Connell's office. The clock ticked loudly against the silence as Stephen laid out the folder. For 2 hours, we went through everything, the notes, the recordings, the photos, the financial proof, the poisoning report. The sergeant's face grew darker with every page. When the final recording ended, he sat back, rubbing his temples. My God, he murmured. Your sons, they murdered their own father. Yes, I said quietly, and they tried to murder me. He looked up. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Mrs. Hayes, once I issue these warrants, there's no turning back. They stopped being my sons the moment they killed their father," I said. "Do what you have to do." He nodded and picked up the phone. By 10 o'clock, the district attorney himself was in the office. After reviewing the evidence, he signed the arrest warrants for Charles and Henry Hayes. The plan was set. At dawn, they would be arrested before they could destroy anything or flee. The longest night. Stephen drove me home that night. The streets were quiet, washed in moonlight. As we pulled into my driveway, he turned to me. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." "I can stay. I'll be fine," I said. For the first time, I know I'm not crazy. That's enough to get me through. He hesitated, then nodded. "If anything happens, call me, or call O'Connell directly." I promised I would. After he left, I sat in the kitchen, the same spot where this nightmare had started, surrounded by Ernest's photos. The clock struck midnight. For the first time since my husband's death, I prayed not for peace, but for justice. When I finally drifted to sleep, it wasn't from exhaustion. It was from relief. Because tomorrow morning, my son's lives would end. And Ernest would finally rest. The trap springs at 6 in the morning. The phone rang. Charles's voice. "Mom, you need to come to Henry's house right away," he said, sounding frantic. "Something terrible has happened." "What's wrong?" I asked, playing along. "It's better if we tell you in person. Please, hurry." My blood went cold. They knew. They must have sensed something was coming. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't know, was that the police were already on their way. "I'll be right there," I said sweetly, and hung up. Then I locked the doors and waited. At 7:30, I saw flashing lights through the curtains, 3 police cars heading down opposite streets, toward each of my sons' homes. My phone buzzed again. Charles, then Henry, then both. I didn't answer. At 9 o'clock sharp, Sergeant O'Connell knocked on my door. "Mrs. Hayes," he said, smiling grimly. "It's over. They're in custody. Both of them." I closed my eyes and exhaled. 42 years of love, betrayal, and heartbreak collapsed into one single word: justice. The town of Spring Creek had never seen so many reporters. They came from the city, from nearby counties, even from out of state. Vans parked along the courthouse steps, cameras flashing, microphones shoved into the faces of anyone willing to speak. The banners on the news vans read things like, "Family betrayal in Spring Creek," "Sons on trial for fathers, murder, the Hayes case," "Greed, poison, and the price of love." Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of old paper and nerves. I sat in the front row, wearing a simple black dress, the same one I had worn for Ernest's funeral. Only this time, I wasn't burying anyone. I was here to resurrect the truth. Stephen Callahan sat beside me. He looked calm, but I saw the tension in his jaw, the quiet fury of a man who had seen too many families torn apart by the same ugly sin. When the doors opened and the guards led my sons inside, the air in the room seemed to thicken. Charles and Henry, my boys, dressed in orange prison uniforms, shackled, pale. Henry's eyes darted around the room, restless, nervous, searching for an escape that didn't exist. Charles kept his head down, jaw tight, still trying to play the part of the man in control. But control was gone. So was charm. So was everything they had built their lives on. When Charles finally looked up and met my eyes, for the briefest second, I saw something, not remorse exactly, but recognition, like a man remembering that his victim could still bleed. Opening statements. The prosecutor, a calm woman named Linda Marlowe, stepped to the center of the room. Her voice carried the weight of quiet authority. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is not just a case of greed. This is a story of betrayal, a story of how 2 men murdered the father who raised them, and plotted to murder their mother, for the sake of money." Her words echoed against the wood-paneled walls. Charles shifted in his seat, jaw twitching. Henry wouldn't look up. Linda continued, "We will show you evidence, recordings, documents, and eyewitness accounts that prove beyond doubt that Charles and Henry Hayes deliberately poisoned their father with methanol, falsified medical documents, and attempted to have their mother declared legally incompetent in order to take her estate. This was not a crime of passion. It was cold, calculated, planned." Then she nodded toward me. "And yet, the person sitting here, Mrs. Margot Hayes, had the strength to uncover the truth, to face it, to fight it." The defense attorney, a sharp man with slicked back hair named Jefferson Pike, stood next. He paced, adjusting his tie, feigning sympathy. "This is a tragic misunderstanding," he began. "My clients were under enormous financial pressure. They loved their father, They wanted to help him, not harm him. What we are witnessing here is the result of paranoia, manipulation, and grief. Mrs. Hayes has suffered terribly, and in her suffering, she has been misled by false evidence and coincidences. He glanced at me, a smirk barely hiding behind false pity. We intend to prove that the so-called recordings are inadmissible, the documents circumstantial, and that Mrs. Hayes's emotional instability led to false conclusions. I wanted to stand up and scream. Instability. They had tried to kill me, and now they dared to call me unstable. But I stayed quiet. I let justice have its turn. The evidence unfolds over the next week. The prosecution built its case piece by piece, like a slow-motion storm. First came Stephen Callahan. He testified about Ernest's suspicions, his investigation, and the recordings he'd obtained. He described how Ernest came to his office, voice trembling, saying, "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." The jury listened in absolute silence as he played the recordings. Ernest's voice first, calm and resigned. Then, Charles's voice, cold as steel. "I already have the methanol. It'll look like a heart attack. Mom won't be a problem after he's gone. You could have heard a pin drop." Then Henry's voice followed. "Tomorrow, Charles is going to put it in Dad's coffee." When the last recording ended, the room stayed silent for a full 30 seconds. The prosecutor broke it softly. "Mr. Callahan, are you certain those voices belong to Charles and Henry Hayes?" Stephen looked directly at them. "I'd stake my career on it." Charles's lawyer tried to object, said the recordings were illegally obtained, but Stephen had been careful. He had Ernest's signed authorization to install the devices. Everything was legal. Everything would stand. Then came the medical examiner. He confirmed what Ernest had feared. The exhumation showed high levels of methanol in his blood, levels consistent with deliberate poisoning. He explained, step by step, how methanol mimics symptoms of a stroke or heart attack, how death can come slowly, and how easily it can be hidden. The courtroom gasped when he held up the medical charts. Mr. Hayes's organs showed no signs of explosion-related trauma. The examiner said, "In fact, there was no explosion at all. The crossfire when it was my turn to take the stand. My knees almost gave out." Stephen's hand on my arm steadied me. The bailiff swore me in, and I sat facing the jury. "Mrs. Hayes," the prosecutor began gently, "can you describe your relationship with your husband?" I smiled faintly, even as tears filled my eyes. "He was my best friend, my partner. We built a life together from nothing. We raised 2 boys. We had love, real love. And your relationship with your sons?" "It was good," I said, though my voice cracked. "For a long time. They were bright, kind. Ernest adored them. But as they grew older, money changed them. Success changed them." She nodded. "Tell us about the days leading up to your husband's death." I took a deep breath and began the hospital. The strange efficiency. The way they talked about insurance instead of recovery. Then I told them about the text message at the funeral. Every juror leaned forward. The message said, "I'm alive. Don't trust our sons." At first, I thought grief was making me lose my mind, but then the evidence started appearing. The money withdrawals, the forged signatures, the notes Ernest left behind. The defense attorney rose. "Objection, hearsay, overruled," the judge said. I continued. "I went to the police. They told me there was no explosion, no report." That's when I realized my sons had invented the accident to cover up what they'd done. When I finished, I couldn't look at Charles or Henry, but I could feel their eyes on me burning with a hatred that used to be love. The breaking point after 3 days of testimony. The defense began its case. They painted my sons as desperate but loving, victims of financial strain, influenced by outside parties. But the facade cracked when the prosecutor asked to play one final recording, the one where they plotted my own death. The judge agreed. The room darkened slightly as the audio played through the speakers. "Charles, once we get Dad's money, we'll deal with Mom next. Henry, we'll make it look like suicide, a widow who can't live without her husband. Charles, then it's all ours." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. One woman in the gallery stood up and left in tears. Another crossed herself. I sat frozen, staring at nothing, even after all I'd seen. Hearing them say it, hearing my children talk about killing me, tore something deep inside me that would never heal. The defense tried to claim the recordings were edited. The prosecution immediately produced the original file metadata. Everything matched. Everything was authentic. That was when Charles broke. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "This is insane. She's the one who destroyed our family. The judge banged the gavel. Order in the court. Charles stood, trembling with fury. You think she's innocent. She ruined us. She never believed in us. Everything we did was for her. Henry tried to pull him down, hissing, "Shut up, Charlie," but it was too late. The jury saw everything they needed to see. The guilt, the rage, the collapse of the mask, the verdict after closing arguments. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. I sat outside the courtroom the entire time, clutching Ernest's old watch, the one he'd fixed 3 times even though it never kept perfect time. Stephen sat beside me in silence, both of us listening to the distant hum of courthouse air vents. When the jury returned, I could barely stand. The foreman rose. In the case of the state versus Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes, on the charge of first-degree murder of Ernest Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder against Margot Hayes, we find the defendants guilty. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, whispers, sobs. Charles dropped his head into his hands. Henry went pale, mouthing something I couldn't hear. Maybe I'm sorry, maybe no. The judge's gavel struck like thunder. Charles Hayes and Henry Hayes, for the premeditated murder of your father and the conspiracy to murder your mother, this court sentences you to life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole for 30 years. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the ceiling fan. And then, finally, I exhaled. Not relief, not victory, something quieter. Justice. After the verdict, outside reporters swarmed, shouting questions. Mrs. Hayes, how do you feel? Do you forgive your sons? What will you do now? I didn't answer. I just said, my husband can rest in peace now. That night, I sat on the porch, the same porch where Ernest and I had spent decades watching the sunset. I looked at the empty chair beside mine and whispered, we did it, my love. We told the truth. The wind rustled through the trees like a sigh. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of the dark. The trial ended, but the silence that followed was heavier than any gavel. For 42 years, my life had been measured by the sound of Ernest's laughter, the ticking of his tools in the shop, the steady rhythm of his breathing beside me at night. Now, the house was still, not peaceful still, but the kind of stillness that hums with ghosts. Reporters left, neighbors stopped whispering. The world moved on, but I couldn't, not yet. The aftermath. A week after the sentencing, I returned home for the first time since the verdict. The kitchen table still held the small scars from where Ernest used to fix his clocks, faint circular burns and scratches that had once annoyed me. Now they were sacred. Doris came over that evening with a casserole I never touched. She hugged me, her eyes full of a grief she didn't know how to name. They'll never hurt anyone again, she said softly. You did what you had to do. I nodded, but inside, I wasn't sure. Justice doesn't bring peace, it just rearranges the pain. For nights, I would wake up thinking I heard footsteps in the hall, or the low rumble of Ernest's voice calling my name. Sometimes I even reached across the bed expecting him to be there, but there was only the pillow, cold, flat, and empty. That was when the first letter came. The letter had arrived in a plain white envelope, addressed in handwriting I would have recognized anywhere. Charles. I stared at it for an hour before opening it. My hands trembled as I slid the paper out. Mom, I know I don't deserve to call you that anymore. I can't sleep. I can't eat. I see Dad every time I close my eyes. I keep hearing his voice asking me, why, son, Henry's not talking to me. He blames me for everything. Maybe he's right. I was the one who came up with the plan. I thought I was saving us from debt, from shame. I thought it would fix everything. But all I did was destroy the only thing that mattered. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to know I'm sorry, Charles. I read it 3 times. I wanted to rip it to shreds, but I couldn't. Because buried beneath the horror and betrayal was still that echo of my son. The boy who once brought me wildflowers after scraping his knees. The boy who cried when Ernest broke his favorite toy just to teach him how to fix it again. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into Ernest's old metal box, the same box that had once held proof of their crime. It was where it belonged. Now, among the ruins of the truth, the garden. I couldn't bear to go into the shop 4 weeks after the trial. But one afternoon, I forced myself to open the creaking door. The smell of oil and dust hit me like a memory. I stood there for a long time, staring at Ernest's workbench, the wrenches lined up perfectly, the small wooden stool he'd built himself. That was when I made my decision. If death had turned this place into a tomb, I would turn it into something alive. I sold the old machines for scrap and cleared the room until only sunlight and echoes remained. Then, with the little money I had, I filled it with soil and seeds, red roses, white carnations, sunflowers. It took months, but slowly, the shop transformed into a garden, a living monument, a quiet rebellion against the violence that had once claimed it. Every morning, I'd walk barefoot across the cool earth and whisper, "You still build things, Ernest, only now they bloom." The second letter 2 months later, another letter came, this one from Henry. "Mom, I don't know where to start. Charles doesn't talk to me anymore. He says I ruined everything by panicking. Maybe I did. I was weak. I followed him like I always did. I see Dad in my dreams, but he's not angry. He just looks disappointed. That's worse. I know I'll die in here, maybe not by law, but by guilt. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I needed to tell you that I miss you. I miss home. I miss how you used to sing in the kitchen when you cooked. I wish I could go back. Henry." I folded that letter, too, but I didn't put it with Charles's. I left it on the kitchen table open where I could see it, because somewhere between the lines, I felt something different. Not confession, not justification, remorse. It didn't erase what they'd done, but it mattered that he felt it. The breaking point: 3 months after the trial, Stephen came to visit. He brought groceries and stayed for coffee. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I'm surviving," I said, "one sunrise at a time." He nodded, glancing at the garden through the window. "Ernest would be proud of you." I smiled weakly. "Maybe, but I still wake up angry some mornings. I still ask why." Stephen looked at me for a long moment. "You may never get that answer. Some people don't kill because they stop loving. They kill because they never learned what love really is." We sat in silence for a while. Then, he reached into his coat pocket and handed me another envelope. "This came through the DA's office," he said quietly. "Charles wrote a final statement for the record." My stomach dropped. "Final?" Stephen hesitated. "He took his own life yesterday, in his cell." The words hit me like ice water. I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. "Mom, I can't live with what I've done. I see Dad every night. I can't forgive myself for poisoning him, for what I planned for you. I thought I was strong, but I'm not. Please tell Henry I'm sorry. Tell Dad I'm sorry. Charles." The paper slipped from my hand. Stephen caught it before it hit the floor. I didn't cry, not right away. I just sat there, numb, until the reality settled in like dust. One son dead, one broken, both lost. Ernest was gone, but so were they, all of them. My entire family, reduced to letters and ghosts. The visit a week after Charles's death. I went to the prison hospital to see Henry. He looked nothing like the boy I had raised. His eyes were hollow, his hair unkempt, and his hands trembled as he reached for the glass between us. "Mom," he whispered through the phone. "I didn't know he'd do it." "I know," I said softly. "You both made your choices." He pressed his forehead against the glass. "He said he wanted you to forgive him." I swallowed hard. "I forgave the children you once were," I said, "but not the men you became." He nodded slowly, tears rolling down his face. "That's fair." The guard tapped his shoulder. Time was up. As I walked out, he called after me, "Mom, do you still visit Dad's grave?" "Every Sunday," I said, without turning back. "You should pray he forgives you too." The choice after that day. I stopped reading Henry's letters. They came often, at first desperate, rambling, half delusional, then less and less. One night, I gathered them all and placed them in a shoebox. I tied it shut with string and put it on the top shelf of my closet. Not to forget, but to protect what peace I had left, because grief, I had learned, is like a garden too. You can't stop weeds from growing, but you can choose what stays, and I chose peace. But foundation, it was Stephen's idea. "You could help others," he said one afternoon while we sat on the porch. "People who've been through the same kind of betrayal, at my age." I laughed softly. "What can I possibly do?" "Tell your story," he said simply, "and use what you have left to make something good out of something horrible." That night, I thought of all the families I'd seen at court. Mothers hiding tears behind trembling hands, wives who didn't understand how love could turn to violence. By morning, I had decided. I took the life insurance money that had been soaked in blood, and used every cent to start a small charity. The Ernest Hayes Foundation for Victims of Family Crimes. We provided legal aid, therapy, and investigative help to families who suspected abuse or financial manipulation. I called in favors. Stephen helped with the paperwork, and Doris baked cookies for every volunteer meeting. within a year. We had helped our first 5 families. It didn't erase my pain, but it gave it purpose. Every life we saved was another way of keeping Ernest alive. The garden bloomed. Yes, passed quietly. The garden behind the house grew wild and beautiful, red roses climbing the walls, sunflowers bending toward the light, daisies dancing in the wind. On Sundays, I still walked to Ernest's grave with fresh flowers. I'd sit on the cool stone and tell him everything about the foundation, about the people we'd helped, about the children who sent thank you cards. Your death wasn't in vain, I'd whisper. You're saving people, even now. The wind would stir the leaves, and I liked to believe that was him, answering in his quiet way. It has been 5 years now since that terrible day at the cemetery. I am 71, and my hair has turned white as frost, but when I look in the mirror, I see strength where there used to be sorrow. Spring Creek still remembers the case. People still stop me at the market to thank me for my courage. Though I don't feel brave, I feel simply human. Steven still visits every Wednesday for coffee. He became my family, the one I chose after losing the one I was given. Sometimes, when the light hits just right, I see a kindness in his eyes that reminds me of Ernest, steady, quiet, loyal, and every night, before I sleep, I whispered the same words I whispered the day he died. We did it, my love. We told the truth. The morning sun touched everything gently that day. The lace curtains, the photo frames, the little brass clock Ernest once said would never keep time right, but had a good heart. I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, the same seat where I had once read letters that tore my soul apart. But this morning was different. The air was soft. The world, finally, was quiet. Spring Creek had moved on. And so, at last, had I. The foundation's work, the Ernest Hayes Foundation, had grown beyond anything I'd ever imagined. What started as a table and a dream in my living room had turned into an office downtown. Real walls, real staff, real families saved from what I couldn't be saved from. Some came crying, clutching envelopes of unpaid debts and forged documents. Some came whispering, afraid of their own blood. I saw myself in every one of them, and each time we helped someone escape a trap, a controlling spouse, a manipulative relative, a quiet crime hidden under the word family. I felt Ernest's hand on my shoulder. We'd started saving lives from the same kind of betrayal that killed him. Stephen became our lead investigator. He never liked titles, but people called him the man who listens, because that's exactly what he did. He'd spend hours talking to broken people until they found the courage to fight back. Sometimes, when I watched him from the doorway, bent over his notepad, a streak of silver in his hair catching the light, I thought maybe some souls are sent to finish what others started. He never married again after his wife died. I never remarried after Ernest. But in the long, quiet years, we became something else. Not lovers, not replacements, but to people who understood what it meant to survive. The visit. It was autumn when I got the call from the state prison. Mrs. Hayes, the voice said, "This is Warden Fields. Henry Hayes would like to see you. He's not well. He says it's important." I sat with the receiver pressed to my chest for a long time. My first instinct was to say no, but something in me, maybe the part that was still a mother, said go. 3 days later, I was standing in that cold, gray visiting room again. Henry was thinner now, his face drawn, his hands trembling. The fire that once burned in his eyes was gone, replaced by something hollow, almost peaceful. When he saw me, his lips quivered into a small, uncertain smile. "Mom," he said, his voice cracked like old wood. "You came." I nodded. "You asked me to." He pressed his hands to the glass. "I didn't. I wanted to tell you," he said softly. "Charles wasn't the only one who was sorry. I am too. Every single day. I talk to Dad sometimes in my head. I tell him about the shop, about you, about the garden." His eyes filled. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to thank you for what you did, for building something good out of what we destroyed." The silence between us stretched long and heavy. I finally said, "I forgave the boys I raised a long time ago, but I will never forgive the men who killed my husband." He nodded, tears running down his cheeks. "That's fair." As the guard came to take him away, he turned and said, almost in a whisper, "Tell Dad I'm coming home soon." It wasn't a threat, it was a confession. 3 weeks later, I got the letter. Henry had died in his sleep. Heart failure, they said, but I knew better. He had finally stopped running. The last letter after his death. The warden sent me a box with Henry's things, a Bible, a notebook, and a sealed envelope addressed to Mom. I sat in the garden before opening it. The air smelled like roses and rain. Mom, when you read this, I'll be gone. I don't want you to cry for me. I made my choices. I deserve what came. I spent 5 years thinking about that night. About Dad. About you. I know now what Charles and I did can't be undone. But I also know what you've done since then matters more than what we did. You turned our evil into something that helps people. You did what Dad always did. Fix broken things. I hope when you see Dad again, you'll tell him I finally understand. Henry. I sat there for a long time, holding the letter against my chest. The wind moved through the garden, and for a moment I swear I heard 2 voices in it, Ernest's low hum, and Henry's younger laugh. And maybe it was my imagination, but I thought I heard Ernest say, "It's over, Margot. Come back to the light." Legacy. The next year, I sold the house. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I had finally remembered everything that Ernest used to say. When the work is done, you leave the shop clean. So I did. I left the walls white, the floor swept, and the garden blooming in the sunlight. I took only one thing with me, a small tin box with Ernest's letters, the boys' apologies, and a pressed rose from the garden. Stephen helped me move into a small cottage by the lake. We still worked together, but quieter now. He'd bring me wildflowers every Friday, and we'd sit on the porch watching the water change colors at sunset. Once, he asked me, "Do you ever think about what comes next?" I smiled. "I think Ernest is waiting. I think, when my time comes, he'll be there by the gate with that same crooked grin, and say, 'Took you long enough, Margie.'" Stephen chuckled. "And what will you say?" I looked at the horizon, that I had to finish the work first. Epilogue. Years later, when I was too old to walk to the foundation myself, they named a new program after me, the Margot Project. It offered scholarships to children who had lost parents to domestic or family violence. At the ceremony, Stephen read a speech in my name. Margot Hayes taught us that justice isn't about revenge. It's about restoring what evil tried to break. She proved that even when love dies, compassion doesn't have to. They say I smiled that day more than I had in years. I believe it. That night, after everyone left, Stephen wheeled me out to the garden one last time. The stars were bright, the air cool and clean. He placed a single rose in my lap, red as dawn. "You ready to rest, Margot?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Yes, the garden's finished." And with that, I closed my eyes. The letter found when Stephen later sorted through my things. He found a note tucked into Ernest's box, written in my shaky old handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means I've gone home. Don't grieve for me." The story ended the way it should. Tell Ernest I kept my promise. Tell the boys they're forgiven. And if you ever hear the wind in the roses, that's us. Margot. He folded the letter gently and placed it back in the box. Then he carried it to the garden and buried it under the biggest sunflower. And as the wind moved through the petals, he could almost swear he heard Ernest's voice whisper, "You fixed it, Margie. You really did."